everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are wrapping up all of the books that I read in the second quarter of 2024, which is April, May, and June. I have been reading a lot fewer books this year, and in this second quarter I read even fewer than in the first quarter. And I think that was because I was still kind of in a reading slump, but I was really determined to read more physical books, and I was reading some longer books, and so not all of which I finished in the second quarter. So some of them you'll be like, what long books are you even talking about? Some of them I didn't even finish until July. So I had some books that I was like very determined to read physically, but it was just taking me longer to get through them because I was still, or maybe am still, I'm not quite sure where I'm at with this reading slump situation, but I was still in a reading slump at the time, so I was moving slow. But let's just dive in. I have 7 books to tell you about today, so let's get into it. Starting off with 2 books that are in a series, which is the Wilmont Sisters series by Chloe Leese. I think this is going to be a trilogy, but only the first 2 books are out currently. The first one is called Two Wrongs Make a Right, and the second book is Better Hate Than Never. And the first one I actually technically read right at the end of March, but I just waited to talk about it until this one so I could talk about them together. I wanted to read these because I binged the Bergman Brothers series by Chloe Leese and absolutely loved it. And I did not like these as much. The first one is, I think, supposed to be kind of like a contemporary romance retelling, loose retelling of Much Ado About Nothing, and the second one is The Taming of the Shrew. It's a series that again is following siblings, so we're following these 3 sisters and each book is one of their romances. I honestly don't remember that much about this series. It was pretty forgettable for me. I felt very neutral about the romances themselves, and then I remember both books, the first book much more than the second one, just had certain things that I was like, this makes no sense. The first book, it was much more of an issue, partially because actually it's kind of coming back to me as I'm starting to complain about it. The basic premise of the first one doesn't really make sense, because the main character, her siblings are trying to like set her up with this guy, and they meet at a party. They immediately do not hit it off, and kind of start arguing. Like they just get off on the wrong foot. Things aren't going well. Her sister then gives her some like mystery guy's phone number and is like, you can't know his name, and he doesn't know your real name. You need to like text each other before you like meet each other. So they start a text conversation and they really hit it off over text. When they meet up in person, they realize that like who it is, and they're like, oh, I actually don't like you. They're mad about, or at least she's particularly mad about, being manipulated. And so then her like revenge plot is, we're going to fake date to make everyone think that their matchmaking was successful, and then we're gonna break up so that they feel bad about it, and that's going to be our revenge for trying to manipulate us. And I just like, that makes no sense. How is that revenge? That makes absolutely no sense as a revenge plot. It just seemed like a really forced way to try and create a fake dating trope, which, like, I love a good fake dating trope. This one wasn't good, you know? Also, I felt like the text conversation part of the plot was really underutilized. Like, I don't particularly like that kind of thing in a story. It's kind of like an epistolary thing because they're just exchanging messages. It was such a brief moment at the beginning of the story that it felt very pointless. I think that if they were going to incorporate that as a plot point, it really should have been a lot larger part of the story. They should have like continued to text each other, not realizing who it was, built up this relationship so that when it was revealed, it was more of a shock, and also was more meaningful, that like they had really built up this connection over text, and so then it would create more of a inner conflict for them as they realize who it is, and also more of a reason to be like, oh, but I actually do like you. Anyways, I just feel like even though I don't really like that kind of thing in a story that much, I just feel like it would have, like, either have it or don't have it. Like, really use it or just don't include it at all. There's also something later on in the story, which I won't tell you for spoiler reasons, but there's a decision that one of the characters makes that just makes absolutely no sense. I'm like, I do not understand how you got from A to B in this thought process. The second book that was less of an issue of like things not making sense, but it still had some moments, they just were not as egregious in the second book. That being said, I did still like have fun reading these. They were pretty forgettable for me because I really don't remember that much about them, but they were a good time when I was in the mood for contemporary romance. So I think I gave the first one 3 stars and the second one 3.5 stars. Next, I read another contemporary romance, which was Work For It by Talia Hibbert. This is a standalone male-male romance where we're following our 2 characters. Griff lives in a small town. He helps take care of is it a flower farm? It's been a while now since I've read this, but he helps take care of like this farm. He's this really big guy. He's kind of an outcast in their community, and people kind of treat him like he's stupid, and he only really has like 1 or 2 friends in the town. He's kind of treated as an outcast. And then our other character, Keynes, who also sometimes goes by Alu, comes to visit this small town. He's from the big city, but he's at a point where he feels like things are kind of going wrong in his life and he needs to get away. So he goes to this small town on vacation. He meets Griff, and the 2 of them have a rough start, but of course eventually they fall for each other. And this one of Talia Hibbert's books, it's not my favorite. I just didn't feel as like attached to any of the characters. I liked Griff's character. I found Alu's character interesting, but I just felt like we didn't get enough about him. There were things about how like he kind of felt like an outsider in his own way. He referenced kind of feeling like an alien, but then he would sort of they just sort of said that one or 2 times and then just sort of didn't come back to it. And I felt like there could have been more done with that. And it just seemed like he had a lot of like emotional stuff going on in his life that he didn't want to deal with, or just was dealing with in his own way. But I don't feel like we really got to engage with that as the reader. So I just kind of wish that we had gotten more depth with his character, because that would have helped me to care about both of them and their relationship a little bit more. Yeah, I mean, I listened to this as an audiobook. I really didn't like the voice that the narrator did for Griff. I liked his character, but like the voice that he did was just very weird for Griff. I don't even know how to describe it, but I just was like not a fan. Anyways, I thought that this was all right. It was definitely not my favorite thing from Talia Hibbert, but it was still fun to read while I was still in the mood for contemporary romance. So I gave it like a 3 to 3.5 stars. Next up, I read Icarus by Kay Ankrum. This is a YA contemporary that is following our main character, Icarus, who is the son of an art forger slash art thief who really only steals art from one specific man who lives in their town. So there's this man, Mr. Black, who Icarus's father has some kind of vendetta against, which we eventually find out more about. But over the years, he has just slowly but surely been replacing Mr. Black's entire art collection with forgeries, and has enlisted Icarus in helping him with this, both with a little bit with the forging, but more with the thievery. So Icarus has developed some very specific skills of breaking and entering and stealing art and disappearing without a trace. Because of this, he has a very isolated life. He's not really allowed to have any friends. He's certainly not allowed to invite anyone over to their house because it could expose their secret. But Icarus wants out. He is making plans to escape when one day, as he is scoping out a piece of art at Mr. Black's home, he runs into Mr. Black's son, Helios. And the two of them develop this very intense relationship. And Icarus continues to sneak into the house to visit Helios. And we're following Icarus as he is continuing or building this relationship with Helios, as he is also starting to branch out a little bit at school and maybe start to make some new friends, and also making his plans to escape this life and learning more about his father's past and why they're even doing all of this. I loved this. I love the way that Kay Ancrum writes stories and characters and emotions. She tells this in very short vignettes. Some of the chapters are one page. It's 2 paragraphs is an entire chapter. But they are just these vignettes of heightened emotion for these characters, these very impactful and important moments in their lives. Throughout this story, there's this real feeling of desperation from multiple characters, but especially from Icarus, desperation for freedom, but I think even more so desperation for connection, because he is just so intensely lonely. But I absolutely loved this. I already want to reread it, even though I just read it a couple months ago, but I gave this 5 stars. It was fantastic. And I read this physically, and I read it in 2 days, which in the midst of a reading slump is extremely impressive for me. Then I read Heartstopper Volume 5, I think, whatever the most recent one is that came out at the end of last year. I do have a physical copy, but I don't know where I put it. I enjoyed this. It's adorable as always. This one was the first time that the graphic novels have ventured into the topic of sex, really, and I feel like it did a very good job of balancing things and approaching the topic in a way that felt appropriate for these characters and in line with the tone of the rest of the series. So I appreciated that. But yeah, I always love reading Heartstopper, and I'm not sure, was this the final installment or is there going to be one more after this? I'm not really sure. I just realized that Heartstopper is right here. It's right behind me. I was looking for it everywhere, didn't know where it was. It's literally right behind me. Anyways, after that, I finished The Queens of INNIS Leer by Tessa Gratton. I did a reread of this, which is one of my favorite books. This is one of the chunky books that I was determined to read physically, but oh my gosh, it took me so long to read this. And it wasn't because I wasn't enjoying this. I loved rereading it, but it is a denser read and I was in the middle of a reading slump. So it took me a while to get through. I also put it down for a little while because there is a point kind of in the middle of the book where there's a bit of a lull, and that was just tough. Being in a reading slump and hitting a lull in a book is just hard. So I put it down for a little while and then finally picked it back up to finish it. But this is a adult fantasy retelling of Shakespeare's King Lear, but it is told from the perspective of his 3 daughters instead of from the king's perspective. It takes place on INNIS Leer, which is a magical, somewhat sentient island, which they have multiple kinds of magic. The island itself is imbued with magic. The trees are somewhat sentient. There is a language of trees that certain people are able to communicate with them. There are root waters, which are these underground rivers, which they can kind of communicate to the island through the root waters, and they use it for like some kinds of blood magic. And then they also have reading prophecies in the stars. Ultimately, this is a very slow-paced political family drama. Because it is about a royal family, the family drama is political drama, but it is really focused on these characters and their like familial relationships. The writing in this is one of the things that I love the most about it. It is so beautiful. It is a little bit like denser maybe, but it is so beautiful. It is almost poetic in the way that it is written. Tessa Gratton does a fantastic job of writing nature vibes. Like, this is peak nature vibes. You know, the nature magic, the atmosphere, speaking to the trees. It is all just so beautiful. I love the characters in this. I know some people feel that there is a lot of distance from the characters. I don't find that. I love these characters very much. I find them really engaging. They are almost archetypal in the way that they are written, but I just find them fascinating and I love them so much. Even as some of them, like, I hate them and I'm just like, what is wrong with you? What are you doing? I still love them so much. There's just so much like emotional tension in the story. It is, I don't know, I just find it so immersive, and this is one of those books where I'm like, this is certainly not for everyone, but it is so perfect for me. I absolutely adored rereading this, and once again, I gave it 5 stars, 4.5 stars, somewhere around there. It's still a favorite. It is fantastic. At some point soon, I do want to also reread the second book, Lady Hotspur, but I need to read some other things in between. These books are quite a commitment, but I love them very much. The last book that I read in this quarter was Demon Daughter by Lois McMaster Bujold. It is part of the Penric and Desdemona series, which is a series of novellas set in the world of the 5 gods. And in this series, we are following Penric, who is a fairly unassuming kind of guy, but he had accidentally gotten possessed by a demon, which he then names Desdemona, and this demon gives him powers. So he becomes this extremely powerful sorcerer, but he is very much like an unassuming kind of like academic sort of guy. And so throughout the series, we're following them through different adventures, and he becomes kind of an expert on demon possession. And so in this book, when a young girl is found possessed with an also extremely young demon, she is brought to Penric. At first, they don't know where she came from. They don't know how she really got possessed by this demon. And so they are trying to figure out like what is to become of her. And also trying to quickly teach her how to like harness this magic, because it is very dangerous if she doesn't know how to control at least it a little bit. Anyways, I won't tell you too much more because it's a pretty short novella, but I really enjoyed this. I always enjoy the way Lois McMaster Bujold writes her characters, and this is just a very fun series. One of the things that's maybe unique about this installment is that we get to see like a fight between Penric and Desdemona, which like Desdemona is the demon that like lives in his head, and so we get to see like what is it like when she's mad at him and they disagree on things. And I gave this one 4 stars. So those are all of the books that I read in the second quarter of the year. I'd love to know, since we've reached kind of the midway point of the year, or we're a little bit past it now, how was the first half of the year for you? How was your reading in the first half? But thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.